You've probably seen our next speaker. He's an investigator, a researcher, and an author of well over a dozen books on all kinds of topics. You've seen him on Ancient Aliens. He's not that guy with the poofy hair. He's not that guy. He's the other guy. He's been on Beyond Belief and Mysteries at the National Park. How about a big hand for Mr. David Weatherly?
Man, isn't this an incredible conference just every year? Yeah. So just a couple of brief things about my research in Sasquatch. One of the things that really fascinates me about this topic is delving into the Native American lore and legends about these creatures. I think it's something that has been vastly overlooked, and all these tribal cultures, they have such a rich history and have so much to say about these creatures, and a lot of it has been ignored. I have spent a good portion of my life in the Southwest, so a lot of my research has been in the desert and among the southwestern tribes in particular, and their outlook on this creature. The topic today, At War with Sasquatch, which incidentally has agitated a few people, just the title, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But I want to jump right in. How many people are familiar with this story? The Sasquatch-human war. Wow, not many I'm seeing. Show of hands, how many people have heard this story? All right, quite a few. So, 1855, it's also called the Choctaw-Bigfoot War. The Choctaw Nation at that time had just went through some changes because of all the treaties and so forth. So we're looking at that corner right over there, which is Choctaw Nation at the time of this story. And specifically it takes place in the McCurtain County Wilderness area, which is right down there in the corner. I'll give you the short version of the story. It involves a group of Choctaw cavalry called the Light Horsemen. They are called upon because farmers are reporting that they're being raided by a group of bandits. Now, the bandits are stealing corn, squash, other crops, but they're also stealing children. And they're riding off into the wilderness and disappearing with them. The children are never seen again. This is happening for some time. The Choctaw Cavalry Unit, led by a gentleman named Joshua LaFleur, half French, half Choctaw, decided to go out in pursuit of these bandits. Had a long ride, they tracked them for some time, they finally found the camp of the, quote, bandits, but they got more than they bargained for. They found that most of the cavalry's horses refused to enter the area because of the stench, and then they saw the creatures, which purportedly were 7, 8, 9 feet tall giants covered in hair. They viciously assaulted the cavalry unit. The only soldiers who stood fast were the point riders, a family named Tubby, a gentleman and his 6 sons. They got into combat with these creatures. Joshua LaFleur, who was, according to the story, greatly loved by his men, was killed almost immediately by these creatures, and he was beheaded. In retaliation, the youngest Tubby's son chased down one of the creatures, killed it with his hunting knife, and in retaliation, he decapitated the creature. As the combat continues, it takes multiple shots to bring these things down. The Tubby men are able to kill all of the creatures. Afterwards, they find that the whole camp is littered with the remains of the missing Choctaws. And these creatures had been eating them. So they were essentially cannibals. The stench purportedly was so overwhelming that it's what drove a lot of the horses away. A lot of the men, even the strongest men, were retching violently from the smell. They gathered the bodies up, created a bonfire, and destroyed all the bodies. That's a shot of the McCurtain County Wilderness area. Some of you have probably been there. It's an amazing place, very rich, very likely a great place for these types of creatures to inhabit. And the story is pretty cool. It's high adventure, And it also apparently is complete BS, sadly. The few things that come up, and I'll be brief again, that are holes in this story. One is that the Tubby men are all reported as being almost giants themselves. The father, Hanali, is supposedly 8 feet 2 inches tall and 540 pounds. That sounds like a Sasquatch right there. All of his sons are well over 7 feet tall, and the grandsons. The big hole in this story is that purportedly these guys were all carrying the .50 caliber Sharps Buffalo rifle. I know there's probably a couple of firearms enthusiasts in the audience since I'm in Texas. Any of you guys that know about the Sharps rifle was actually patented in the 1840s, but the famous .50 caliber Buffalo rifle wasn't really available until the 1870s, and I can promise you the government was not doling them out to Native Americans at that point. So, you know, that's a pretty big hole in this story. There's also versions that say that the giants were actually Vikings. It starts to sound like sci-fi when you really delve into it. Really important for me, Choctaw tribal members discount this tale. Although they do talk about Sasquatch-like creatures, they say this story is not true. The first version of the tale I found was from 2001. That was posted online. And the reason I kind of bring this up, you know, Cliff said last night, he made this comment about it's important to understand fake footprints, right? And that helps you understand what real footprints are. And I kind of have that same belief about these famous encounters. You know, this one has been spread around so much. It's been, if you Google it, you'll find page after page after page telling the story. But they don't delve into the facts. They don't dissect it. They don't try to find out, okay, what's the grain of truth to this legend? You know, where exactly does it come from? I'll tell you a quick side note. I mentioned that the title of my account stirred a few people up. And I've spoken all over the world. I don't think I've ever done a presentation where I had a flurry of comments before I even gave the lecture. And this time I had two things happen. One is I had a bunch of fellow researchers, when it got close to time for the lecture, saying, you're speaking about that Choctaw-Bigfoot War. I need to talk to you right away. My buddy Jerry, in fact, was one of them. And by this time I'd had several people, you know, report their concerns, and I kind of sent right back to Jerry. I said, yeah, you're going to tell me it's BS, right? And he said, oh yeah, you know? I said, yeah, I know. And again, it's a great story. I think there are roots in it that we'll get to in a second. But the other thing that happened with the title of this presentation was that, as you saw, it's called At War With Sasquatch. I'm sitting at my computer. This was just 2 weeks ago. And you know, one of those instant messages pops up. And it says, Sasquatch is angry with you. At first, I'll be honest, at first I thought it was Lyle, you know, just screwing with me. And I looked at the icon, and of course it's this woman, I won't mention her name. But, and I sent something back courteous, and I said, I'm not sure I understand, do you have the right person? Yes, I do. The Sasquatch people are very angry with you. And I said, ma'am, what are you talking about? You're advocating war with Sasquatch. That's the short version, but it was kind of an amusing side note to this whole thing. I actually want to get into something else. I want to take you to a different state, and that is Nevada. Obviously not a place that many people think about when we talk about Sasquatch because, well, that. You know, mostly a lot of flat desert land. At least that's what most people think. How many people have been to Nevada? How many people have been to Nevada other than Las Vegas? So a couple of facts about the state. It is the 7th largest state in size. It is 110,567 square miles. That's the size of Italy. It's the size of a country. The most mountainous state in the contiguous 48. How many people knew that? More named mountain ranges than any other state in the lower 48. Numerous peaks that pass the 11,000 foot mark. Diverse ecosystems. And this is the one that gets me. It's the 9th least densely populated. 3/4 of the population of Nevada lives in the Las Vegas Metroplex area. So we're talking about a vast amount of land that sees little human presence large portions of the time. I want to take you to northern Nevada, to a little place right up here where that star is. It's called Lovelock. Who knows the Lovelock cave story? So Lovelock is about an hour and a half from Reno, about 90 some miles. And I actually have a story about this. My Lovelock cave story starts at Pyramid Lake. This is a Paiute reservation outside of Reno. And it is so named because of that pyramid-shaped rock in the lake. I actually went to Pyramid Lake because I was delving into legends of the water babies. And that's a whole story in and of itself, obviously. At the front of the entrance to Pyramid Lake, the road leading to it, there's a big center that is a Paiute cultural center. And I went inside, had one other investigator with me, and when we parked on the side. We went inside. It's a little museum area and everything, but as we were walking in, there's sort of a walled-in area behind this center, and I saw this sculpture back there. And I said to my friend, I said, we're kind of peering over the bushes and the half lawn. I said, that kind of looks like a Sasquatch. And he says, no, out here in the desert, no. So we went inside. We started talking to some of the people in there and tried to get some information about these water babies. You have to be very respectful when you approach Native Americans, particularly elders, and a lot of times they just won't talk to you. I've been very blessed over the years in that I have gained a lot of friendships among different tribal peoples and had some of them open up to me. This particular gentleman that was called out because he was an elder came in, and at first he didn't really want to talk to me either. You know, I was just making casual conversation, told him why I was there. And I get this kind of, white guy looking for water babies, okay. But, eventually he saw that I was serious and respectful, and he started talking to me and just told me some amazing things. Didn't even think about Sasquatch. When we left this center, went back out to the Jeep, and I went down and got a better look at this thing. Now, what does that look like to you guys? So, for size comparison, that's me standing next to it, and I'm 6'1". So I was really intrigued by this statue. Here it is at Pyramid Lake. I'd never heard any stories up there. So I went back in and talked to this elder again. And I said, look, I'm really sorry to bother you again. I just want to know about this sculpture that's out back. Now, this sculpture it's really cool. It's made by a native artist. That is reclaimed barbed wire. And he just does such an amazing job. He sculpted this along with the juvenile that you see there, and it is a representation of what they call the Sitka. The Sitka story, it comes from Lovelock Cave. And what's interesting is, as the elder was talking to me, he never mentioned the term Lovelock Cave. He just told me the tribal tale, which involves a Paiute tribe and this time of prosperity and peace that they're going through, except for one thing. There are these cannibal giants that come down from the mountain and raid the people. They prey on the weak, they prey on children, they capture them, they throw them into these wicker baskets. Excuse me, these tule is what the baskets are. They throw them into these baskets. Now the baskets, they carry on their backs, and at the top of the basket there are spikes that protrude down inside. So when someone was thrown into the basket, they couldn't get out without being viciously stabbed by these spikes. These giants, the Sitka, would take the people up into the mountains into these caves, and they would never be seen again. This went on for some time. The Paiutes, a lot of them were terrified of these creatures. But some of the warriors got together and decided this has to stop. We have to put an end to this. So they actually banded together with some neighboring tribes who were also being preyed on by these creatures. A large group of warriors went up into the hills and they chased these creatures into a cave. Now, the warriors all gathered outside and they began to taunt. They began to taunt the creatures that were in the cave, and they were demanding that they come out and fight like men and face them like warriors. But the Sitikai refused. The warriors gave them numerous chances, but still the creatures hid inside. So the band of warriors started to gather brush. They piled it up and they filled the entire cave entrance. And they gave the Sitikai one last chance. No response. So they lit the brush up. They let it all burn, the entire cave filled with flame and smoke, and put an end to the Sitikai. So the Paiutes were quite known after that because of their bravery in leading this charge against these cannibal creatures that were terrorizing the people. Now, one thing of very important note, this is a view from up outside of Lovelock Cave, and this probably looks like what most of you guys think of Nevada looking like. It's very dry, it's very flat. I mean, we stood up there and saw dust devils moving across. But really, this region used to be very lush and rich. It was the Humboldt River ran right through here. The tribe lived all along the banks of the river. There were plentiful game and plants and other things that they could thrive on. And this is one of the reasons that the Sitikai also love this area too, because there's their food right there below. That is tule, which is a pretty diverse product. It's something that the Paiutes themselves use, and also that purportedly the Sitikai made their baskets out of. Sarah Winnemucca was the daughter of a Paiute chief. She wrote about this encounter in her book, Life Among the Paiutes, and it's a pretty brief mention, but there's also other numerous accounts from early Paiutes talking about this tale. So I really kind of think that this is where someone got the idea for the Choctaw-Bigfoot War story. That's the entrance to Lovelock Cave, looking from the inside, obviously, and for size comparison, there I am standing inside of it. It's a pretty fascinating place if you ever get up there. It's about 20 miles outside of the town of Lovelock. And there's some pretty amazing things that happened with this cave. I think there are still a lot of unsolved mysteries surrounding Lovelock Cave. This is 1911, a pair of miners were hired to go in and dig out bat guano out of the cave. And they were one of the first ones who reported these bodies being in the cave. Now, this guy, you know, he's talking about a cave, a part of the cave where there's a body that's 6 feet 6 inches tall. And he said that it was mummified with distinctly red hair, which really fits in with the Paiute legend because they said these giants had red hair all over their bodies. The 1911 incident was, that's a shot of the cave. It's still completely covered where there was a fire in the cave, obviously. 1924, before there was an official excavation. Now the problem here is that a lot of stuff was pitched out by those guys digging the bat guano out. So we don't really know how many artifacts were lost along the way. One of the most fascinating things to me was that they found this pair of sandals, 15 inches in length. Now, the Paiutes during that time period, they were not large people. You know, I've talked about this on a few occasions, and people say, well, 15-inch shoe, that's no big deal. Yeah, these days for basketball players maybe. But, you know, back then in the 1800s, for Paiutes, no. Someone of that size would be highly, highly unusual. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. Of course, traditional archaeologists and historians dispute this whole account, and they say, no, you know, it was Native Americans using the cave. They talk about this incident I put up here with the bones being found that indicated cannibalism, they think during a period of famine or something. But, you know, all the natives dispute that. And in fact, they dispute their use of the cave, which I find pretty fascinating too. This sign is outside of Lovelock Cave, and it talks about some of the things that have been found there. They found these duck decoys and remains of these large containers that were buried. And again, traditional historians insist, oh, this was, the Paiutes lived in these caves, they used them. The Paiutes say they did not. In fact, they get so angry about hearing this that I actually know who did this. This was a Paiute who did this. I'm pointing out this scratching out of the fact that it was used by Native Americans. They're quite insistent that they didn't use the cave because it was taboo to go up there. It was the lair of the Sitka, of these cannibals. They wouldn't have anything to do with the thing. There's tons of other mysteries that have come up about Lovelock Cave. There's a few of them here. These reports of these red-haired mummies. Purportedly a giant handprint was found at one point and then disappeared. And then there's this whole legend of these giant skulls that also showed up at some point and then disappeared. Now, you get into a lot of dispute because you get into the whole idea of the giants and you know, the supposed Smithsonian cover-up of those bones and everything. But somewhere along the way, I can tell you that there were artifacts from this cave that disappeared. Now, Paiute elders have told me that. So there is some kind of discrepancy. Jumping over, that's the entrance to Lovelock Cave. Jumping over to somewhere else. Who's heard of Jarbidge? Anybody? Wow, 1 or 2 people. Right up here, it's in the other corner of Nevada, and Lovelock is over here. So this is right up near the Idaho border. Jarbidge is a really cool town. There's no extra R in there. It's not bridge, it's Jarbidge. And there's some cool things about this town. It's the most remote town in the lower 48. It saw a gold rush in the 1900s, but it wasn't much of a gold rush. The highest the population got was around 1,500 people. And it's still a very tiny town. Now, it's known now for its superb fishing and hunting. A lot of groups go up there, and there are hunting camps and fishing camps and so forth. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. The area itself, the Native Americans stayed away from there because they said it was an area that was the domain of monsters that preyed on humans. What does that start to sound like? Really cool thing about Jarbidge, it's the only town that I know of so far, and I have to ask Lauren about this, it's the only town I know of so far that's named after a cryptid. Now I see some of you shaking your heads. Jarbidge, what could that be named after? No, it's not this guy, even though it sounds like it probably makes more sense actually than what the town is named after, because the town is named after this. Choctaw-Bigfoot. Choctaw-Bigfoot was what the Shoshone natives talked about dwelling in this region. Somehow, settlers in the region, when it became a mining town, went from Choctaw-Bigfoot to Jabich to the current Jarbidge. This is probably, I'm sure there's a linguist somewhere that just loves this whole evolution. My theory is just a bunch of drunk miners that couldn't really pronounce Choctaw-Bigfoot and decided one night at the saloon that, we'll call it Jabich. But it's pretty cool that there's such a similar story. If you look on this map, this is Shoshone territory, and this is all Paiute territory. So it's very possible that Shoshone warriors took part in the incident at Lovelock Cave. The incident that the Shoshones had, because they also have a story about combat with these creatures and about chasing down Choctaw-Bigfoot. And they say that it happened on their territory, and that the culmination was up here in Idaho, what's currently Idaho, near the Snake River. Now, they say that these creatures, here's a few facts on them. Again, they preyed on local natives, the same type of story. They throw them into these baskets, carry them up to these caves, and have them for dinner. They were hiding in lava tubes and caves in the region. I found this kind of curious. I've heard this numerous places. The creatures were often seen digging in the ground up on peaks. I know there are a lot of reports of Sasquatch digging in the ground, so I'm not sure what exactly they were looking for. A little kind of crazy. purportedly had glowing eyes that could paralyze their victims and cause them to be motionless long enough that they could be grabbed and thrown in that basket. There are still currently stories about the Jarbidge monster. And when you listen to the descriptions and the stories, these people are essentially seeing a Sasquatch-like figure in the region of Jarbidge. The Shoshone story, incidentally, is very similar to the Paiute tale. The warriors finally started seeking these creatures out. Now, they say that there were multiple caves where these creatures lived, and that any time a band of warriors or hunting party would find the lair of a Choctaw-Bigfoot, they would gather other warriors. They would go to the cave, cover the entrance in brush, set it on fire, and burn these creatures alive. So, pretty fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. Wood Knots Volume 2 covers a lot of the stuff from Nevada, and along with some other great contributions. The Lauren Coleman, the amazing Lauren Coleman, is in this volume along with other people. And I think I've got time for maybe a couple of questions. Yes?
If they were these creatures were putting their captives into baskets, wouldn't that indicate a pretty sophisticated tool-making capability? And
absolutely, yeah.
And the Sasquatch stories about tool-making?
Right. He's asking about the fact that these creatures all purportedly had baskets, which indicates tool-making to some degree. The Paiutes do state that these Sitika would use tule to weave those baskets. And in fact, there's also additional information that the Paiutes claim that these creatures also made rafts out of the tule, and that they would go up and down the river, and that it was one of the ways they avoided the warriors when they were raiding the people. So yeah, fascinating stuff. Yes?
Talk about digging in the ground on peaks. Around here we've got a lot of oil wells. We've seen a lot around oil wells. Things that are attracted to salt. Same thing with peaks. A lot of them are previous volcanic mountains could be salt.
Right. Yeah, that's very possible. He's saying that the digging could be them looking for salt. Any other? Yes, sir.
Did the Indian elders, do they classify these as human or another tribe?
Most of these tales, there are a lot of tales from different tribes about conflict with essentially what's being described as what we perceive Sasquatch as looking like. And they consistently call them, they'll call them another clan, or they'll call them the others, or other beings. So they don't really, there's a fine line that comes up when they start talking about it in physical terms, because they believe that there's a spiritual aspect to these creatures, but essentially that they're some other race of beings that are related to humans somehow, but there's also a gap. So it would take me a while to really explain all that. I hope that makes some sense to you.
They look at them per se, or maybe Neanderthal versus Sasquatch?
Possibly, although a lot of the accounts say that they're completely covered with hair. So, any other questions? Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it.
David Weatherly, right here on our stage.